Why is it so important to understand what's going on? I did a very powerful video for you guys, 10 minutes. You should check it out. Very, very powerful. It gets you in position, location, everything that's going on with your systems. Okay, everything that's going on with your system through codify. Liquid information settings, metaphysical system that you are in transitions. Now, the way you're going to do this is by doing nothing. What do you mean, sir? I'm activated. What do I have to do? I thought I have to get into alignment. I thought I have to start understanding why and understanding how, and no. Because you're asking yourself through hesitation. You're asking yourself, you're separating yourself, knowing that everything's done. So if everything's done, when I say focus on nothing, that means the mind of stillness. That means the silence has to come in because it's already been there. But you can't adjust that until you understand what your body really is here for. It's the purpose, it's the why, it's the how. The how is basically putting everything in position, location inside of you and recognize everything around you got through attraction, but you have to understand how you got there through codification. Now, once you understand that, then you understand how to use it through the binaries. How to turn on a computer, how to turn off a computer, right? So it's true that you understand that everything around you doesn't need to identify you. You have to identify how you brought it in through attraction. Your body is morphing into everything that it sees, but now it's in 8 lines of sequence. 8 lines of panels, 8 lines of attractions, 8 lines of locations. 8, 8, 8, 8. Sending lines of 3 lines of cores in position of 7 oral lines, directing lines of height to location, your 12 measure, which is your clocking system of your nebulas, which is your outlines, which is your outer space. Setting lines of 24 lines of platforms, 20 lines of individual locations of location, settings, and set position, which is your 24 clocking system. So we have to start identifying that through frequencies. And the only way we can do that is to let everything go and stop getting into expectation of this and stop getting expectation of that. You don't need to have answers and questions because questions and answers are already answered inside of you. So what you have to do is just basically focus on nothing, which is the mind. If the mind's done everything, there's nothing to do, is there? So, sir, I'm still confused. I'm still trying to figure out if I'm activated and I don't have to do anything. What am I going to do next? Well, you don't have to do anything next. Well, maybe I want to do this, or maybe you want to do, well, whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter. It's already done anyway, so it doesn't matter what you're in positions of attractions. What you have to identify, where the body's going to be next. And the only way to get into that is into the mind of stillness. Once you get into that, then you understand how to perceive everything of consciousness location that's given you through transmitting and receiving. I'm going to make it very well clear what transmitting and receiving is, guys. You have a true understanding that what your body is, and once it starts to adapt, it starts to surrender. And when it surrenders, it starts to adjust. And when it starts to adjust, it starts to perceive its consciousness. It starts to recognize it as GOD. It starts to understand what a GOD is to its system. It starts to understand what it is to its body. Okay? It understands what's going on through its operation system. It knows exactly how to morph. That's great. But what you have to identify now is you have to identify everything that you touch, which is your 8 senses. You have your internal and you have your external sensories. You have your ESP, but you have your internal ESPs and you get your external. That's a 5-line provision and 3 lines of cycles, 8 lines of track centers. That puts all communication centered to infinities of your crown. Now you understand your crown lines of communication setting, but it's identifying why your body's here is the purpose of it just existing, all levels of existence. Now, once you get into that position location, you start to surrender, you start to accept. You surrender what's going on to everything that's going on. You start to accept everything that's going on inside your body. That gets you in the flow, that gets you in the recognition system. You stop angling things, you stop thinking, which is already knowing, which is already done. When you come into those equations, you don't focus on anything. So when you stop focusing on things, you start listening to yourself inside at a higher frequency. And when you start listening and through those frequencies, you start recognizing what your body is through adaptations. And all it is just a symbiote, to a symbiotic system location to a setting. And once you get into that, you come into the liquid formation system. Your body is a metaphysical system. But you've got to see it through coding. And once you see it through codification system, then you understand how to balance things out. So, for example, when I'm touching my digital pad, yes, it's a digital pad. Yes, it's the sum of all it is. But how did it become the sum of all that is? So if this digital pad is telling me that it is the sum of all that is, that means I'm the sum of all that is. Because if I'm not connected, and it's not connected to me. So you have to truly understand how this works through source of recognition. It's the resource of you, which is the information of you that you already know. That comes from Jupiter. That's your surfacing engine. Now, the more you modify that, the more you understand that and set position. Getting into that communications, and when you let things go and you let things flow, everything inside you starts to understand by listening, actually listening to yourself without listening. Listening is about understanding all levels of you from inside. And then you start to recognize what your body is through adaptation. And once you get into that position occasions, you let everything go. And when you let everything go, you focus on nothing. You come into the mind, you come into the stillness. You quiet the mind, you calm the soul on any situation you get into. What you guys got to get out of in provisions is what you touch. And when you touch anything, you're already morphed into it. Your actual body is morphed into a 4 lines of sequence. It's a digital pad and track location system that has 24 million clocks in setting. Whoa. Okay, so that's interesting. So I have to start identifying these. I have to identify myself first, realize my body is nothing but a morphing of a solar generation light that sets position, location, travels, has direct lines of light communication system. That's all of us of metaphysical settings and position, location, attraction. Yep. You see what your body is. You know what your body is. Now you identify how your body got into morphing, how it got into teleportation, how it got into transmutations. That is your ascension or your unification system, guys. So when you pick something up, you know exactly what you're morphing into because you're letting everything go. You're perceiving it through consciousness. You're identifying it because it brought it in through its attraction. So in that position, you brought this in through its own system. And you understand, I brought this in time. That's why I have it. And the body starts to recognize that in time. And then you understand the alignment, and then you understand how you got here. And how you perceive these things is how you see through consciousness. And when you see through consciousness, you start to understand it gave me instructions how to use it. So I understand that I just morphed into this digital pad. I understand what it is of its source recognition system. Now I have to identify how to get out back into myself, is to realize its own operation, its own consciousness. And when I come back into myself, I'm myself now. I'm perceiving everything how I see, all through its eyes. The eyes, the windows of the soul are me now. But if I'm touching this, and I'm not consciously at its own eyes, of its own awareness, of its own consciousness, its own windows, of its own soul, I'm perceiving this digital pad, which means I'm not identified to my body anymore. I'm only seeing me as the pad. And I'm only seeing what I have in lines of acts. So I'm recognizing these things and I'm talking, whoa, why am I seeing all this? Why am I seeing 31? Why am I seeing the clock? And why am I seeing this? Everything you see, you become. But you have to identify what it is. And the only way to identify that is through a information system of light that you see through vision, your cortical location, your theta, that gets you in lines of communication, imaginations, that you are an attraction. You're attracting things, yes, team. You're traveling through things, yes, team. But now you have to identify through your senses and your sensories. That's 8 provision lines of cycles in one track, communications in one location, and one clocking. Getting into that position locations, you get a better understanding, okay? So that's all this is, basically. So we're going to go into a deeper core and try to get you guys to understand how to use it through codification settings, your binaries, your algorithms, and really understand how to get into nothing, which is basically focus on nothing, right? Because that's all done. The mind's already done everything. The body knows exactly where it needs to be. It's through transmitting and receiving. You're transmitting information. You're receiving from the quantum self, giving you exactly what you're going to be touching next, what you're going to be seeing next, what you're going to be seeing in that positions, what you're going to be watching, what you're going to be doing, what you're going to be wearing, what you're going to be connected to, what you're going to be eating, what you're going to be drinking. You're going to be going to a job in that position, right? So the mind's doing this, the mind's doing that, the mind's going here, the mind's going there. So what you have to understand is the mind itself controlling everything around you. The body is just the conception, knowing exactly how it has to morph into everything. The body is reminding you of transmitting and receiving, giving back that information, transmitting out and receiving in. You're receiving, you're going to morph into this. You're receiving that you're going to be eating this. You're receiving that you're going to be doing this. You're going to be receiving that you're going to be here. You're going to be receiving that you're going to be there. You're going to be with your friends in this position. You're going to be clocking this line connections. You're going to be taking a nap. That's what it is. You're constantly understanding what you're doing every time you come into your senses and sensories, and especially when you're morphing. Sometimes it takes time, right? Especially when you come to E equals mc squared, mass, the velocity. You know, for you to transform in something mass and volume, if you touch an 18-wheeler, it takes time for your body to transform into its system. And if you don't recognize these things and you touch something else, that's overlapping sequence of location setting or symbiote. So you get two lines of communication system over track location of clocking. And you wonder why you get emotional. And you wonder your body gets in position of reaction and not responding. Okay? So that's all this is. And the more you get into that, the more you get balance inside your system, right? All right, so sedate symbiotes, core lines of 4 box, 3 lines of signals, and 3 communications. Direct lines of center, and track communications. Flux over 1, flux over 2. All right, process line, directed signals, and ground lines of surface and traction. Bring it back home in sequence, back in channel, back in operation. All right, so that's in symbolism balance. So what I'm constantly doing is that I don't need to morph into this because I synchronize myself into myself, which is my own mind. Which is my own mind, guys. Which basically the mind does everything and the body does nothing. The body has never done anything. The body just has to remind itself how to morph into itself, understand itself, understand its GOD of itself, understand the adaptations of what's going on through its perceiving of consciousness, how it comes into acceptance, and it's adjusting its system. Especially when you get into seeing all senses and all sensories as of today in set position is now in one cycle. It's a 24 grounds, a 24 clocking system, a 24 measure. That's the scale and the balance of all communication system that puts all of you in track locations. Okay? It's very powerful that we have lines of 3-3, line communications in volume 6 over settings, triangular line rotation, set lines of communication, lines of surface. Setting communication lines of high position location to its system. Ground lines of clockings, 4 lines of setting. Processing lines of signature lines of 2 lines of setting. Processing lines of 3 lines of 4 lines of setting. Processing communication lines of 4 lines of position. Setting communication lines, high core centers, lines of travel. Okay? Setting position of ground, set lines of 2 over 3 over 4 lines of signals. Setting ground lines of 1, set lines across lines, set line communication setting and travel, endpoint communication setting interference, setting direct signals and modification grounds. Setting communication high centers, high travel, endpoint lines of graph communication setting and travel. Directing lines, triangulation from the lines of flux and set position location to a system. Setting communication high position location to its settings, all through its track location setting, into all communication lines and high interference in line communications and system. What is interactions? What is that position locations? Dolphin. Setting lines and screen lines, application lines and set for the set position. Okay? Spider and its web. Okay, guys? All right. Optical streams, direct lines of panels, code lines, configuration system, binary lines, reset lines, of course, centers, lines of travel, directing lines of modification, ground lines of service, set of 34 line sequence, setting lines of ground, communication lines of service, equals lines of 7, or track communication lines of 5, sets position lines of 12 lines of measured. Scales lines of 3, set lines of 2 and 3 line communications, direct lines of 4, over sequence, 2 panels and 1 center into 4 lines of sequence locations of panel. Process line, dimensional sail, and travel communications. All right, so setting signals, location setting to its portal. Setting lines of grounds, setting lines of symbolism, location setting of travel. Setting lines course centers in the rotation system of its grid in set position. All right. Setting lines of 5 signals, 1, 2, 3 lines and 4, and signal lines of 5 in track communications. Now, your direct signals knows exactly what's going on in line position locations. So the more than the modification, ground lines of symbolism, cross lines of course centers, lines of communication, lines of travel. All right. Cross line communication setting, line signal location setting, high position. Bring it back home, back in equation, back in sequence. Okay. So it's more fun, like I said, when you just basically understand what is happening to you, everything you touch, everything you taste, everything you eat, everything you drink, everything you hear, everything you see, it's all connected to your senses and your sensories in one system, one traction, one division locations. 1, 1, 1, 1. And that's where humanity is right now. Now we just got to get you guys prepped and ready in sequence. To truly understand how to modify those 4 1 lines of communication setting in 24 lines of clock location system of travel. Direct lines of 1, that's symbolizing settings. Process communication setting, 1 symbolism. Directing lines and code lines, core centers, and 1 binary track locations. 2 lines of measure, 3 lines of studies, and 4 line communications. So humanity has to get into panels of operation sequence and set position of 4 settings of 4 angles. Okay? Setting core lines, set lines of 1 over process lines of sonar, echo, screen line adaptation of webbing setting and travel. Setting course lines of communication system, all through setting in operation sequence lines of communication lines of travel. Ground lines of symbolism, cross line signals. Solar graph in communication setting, solar screen adaptation of surface and track locations. All right. Then we go to line communications, all through track locations and setting through wormhole. All right, so wormhole goes through line condition setting, process lines, stocking lines of 1 x 2000, process lines of 2, process lines of 3, process lines of 4, and travel. Setting communication high center interference, 1 position of 2, 2 lines of 3, inline, inner circuit, outer line, screen adaptation of process communications. Directing core centers line communication lines, inner line, outer line, inner spectrum, outer position. Setting core lines attractions, indirect communication system all through flux. Process line, indirect signals, back in home sequence, back in channel, back in operation. Okay? So, what we have to truly understand is really understand how to use those portals of ones now. Humanity has to get in that position because it's in 2 panels into 2 panels, space lines of time sequence. Setting clocking system of a 24 angle and line communications. Setting track lines in position of 12, set position of 12. Level lines equals 12, level lines equals 12. That's 12 lines of 1, set position of 2 panels, and that's 11 line sequence of 12 in sequence. So that's 11 over 2, and that's 12 over 2. Sets position lines of travel, 24 line signals, set lines of communication setting and clocking lines. Direct lines of flux, 24 lines of measure, scales communication lines of time over sequence over space. Time measures, scales communication lines of high center location of time measure. Sets clock locations of time editing. Process communication lines of box frames and line position location to its window frame. In that line, rotation surface and track communications. Directing core centers into 2 panels operation sequence and set position. Setting communication lines of ground lines of surface and set position of the magnetic highways and direct signals and 12 lines of sequence of panel. Setting communication high center location of a system, all through tracks, all division, and set calculations. All right? Intelligence. See, you see it, right? There's the intelligence right here in 24 system. Ooh, always informations of intelligence. So once you guys identify your senses and your sensories, then you have to identify everything you come in position that you touch as its own basic configuration system. This is where the team has to come into and modify this now because they're in 12,000 set position location setting and travels into 44. And sets calculation lines of 12 lines of measure, 4 track location settings, sets core lines of 4 panels in line rotation surface and traction. Directing lines of 4 lines angles, calculation lines of 3 over 4 line communications, setting direct signals, a panel communication setting to your pyramids and set position. So that signifies set core lines in position equals line space line of 9. Okay, 9 sequence lines of 6, sets position lines of 9 line position. Process lines of 6 in the center, sets position 9 in position of center operation system that changes the flux of communication. Directing lines of ground lines of surface and track location your crop circles, earth line 1, earth line 2. Set provision location lines of provision and 4 lines of panels. Setting core lines of calculation, setting ground lines of 1, ground lines of 2, ground lines of 6, and ground lines of 8 in travel communications. Setting direct lines of communication, high centers of surface, and set position your solar line communication, setting acceleration. Your acceleration traveling through. Okay? Oh, look at that, it changed. Oh yeah, it changed the direction. Isn't that wow? Bring it back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation system locations. Traveling too fast in sequence. So it changed the modulation, but you can see it's not there anymore, right? The acceleration's gone because I already traveled through. So I have to do it again and set position location system so you can see through frequencies there, right? Did it change in position or is it still there? Still there. The change in position location, is it still there? Still there. Change in position location, is it still there or is it gone? Still there. Bring it back home in sequence, back in channel, back in operation. Boom. All right? All right, so if things disappear in front of you, that means you're still morphed into that setting in track locations in 1, 1, 1, 1. Panel lines, 4 lines of sequence line position of 1, 1, 1, 2. Sets core lines of 2 over traction, 2 over line, and 3 over division. Okay? So you got 2 lines of signals, 2 lines of tractions, and 3 line communications. All right, signify core lines of 3 lines. So I can set 3 lines of 4, through 4 lines of 3, set lines of 7/5, setting lines of communication, setting a travel. Direct lines of 3 panels, cross line signals, and through line communications. Setting track line divisions. So we got 4 panels in the opposite directions, in the opposite directions, in the opposite directions, and set positions. In its locations with setting. Very complicated stuff. All through primer, all through primer, all through its pyramid and track location. Wow. You're constantly dealing with your pyramids, guys. Every single time, every second, every minute, every hour. So your clocking system of 24 lines of measure sets communication. Center lines of communication setting. Stargate 1, Stargate 2, Stargate 3, 4, 5, and 6. Clocking settings into a Stargate measure. Overline sequence over panels. Direct lines in colossal, core lines into interspectrum. Direct lines of interstellar mode and position. Process calculates lines of ground lines at surface and set locations all levels in Jupiter. Directed signals, ground lines of high set core lines, a high set correlation system and travel in position locations in Pluto. Directed signal lines and ground lines of surface and phase directions of time sequence in high travel communications, done by setting. Setting sequence, set position lines of panel through operation sequence. Directing lines of panel, back in sequence, back in travel, back in operation. Boom. All right. So all I'm doing is getting you guys to understand how to go through your light and your dark webs. Now we go through webbing line, core lines, calculates and setting code configuration, location, information lines, and meta lines, core center lines, and metaphysical system, psychological, emotional lines, and line communication setting. That puts the psychosis, location, lines of travel, directing lines of high set correlation system. We got 41 sequence here. That's powerful stuff. Excellent. I love that. All right. So directing lines of panel puts all communication lines of surface. Now direct lines of triangulation of flux, 3 lines of signals, and 4 communication setting. Process lines indicate lines of arrows of indication system in position of center correlates line 0, setting position of 0 track location 3 centers lines of travel. Cross line communication setting opens up the primer circuits and 3 lines of communications. Directing signals, cross lines of communication setting over lines of surface. Setting lines of ground line communication setting on lines of 3 and track location of flux over screen. Directing core lines, setting lines of tractions, set lines of high center of interference, setting communication torical fields and direct signals, and line direct signal in modification grounds that sets the metric meters and scale adaptation surface in his Merkaba tesseract and his tetrahedron. Okay, center core lines back in home sequence, back in panel, back in operation. Ooh, change communication lines to signals locations. All right. So you always work in inside line setting. Okay. So you go in the sequence line. Now we're going to 4 lines of webbing. Webbing line sequence 4 panels, graphing communication lines of window frames, 3 lines of tractions of 4 box. So we got 4 signals into perimeters in position of 1 signal in travel communications. Ground lines, communication setting to your pyramid and travel. There's your pyramid, right? See? Everything's a pyramid that you get in positions, guys. So you have to modify the grounds, modify the powers, and modify the atmosphere's lanes to change in communication setting and travel. Direct lines of 3 over 4, flux over 6 over lines over 12. Sets communication back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation setting. Setting course lines in the position of 0 lines, set lines of ozones. Now the ozone line rotation system has a course centers with clocking line communications. 3 lines of signals and 3 lines of correlation system of travel. Clocking system of 24. We got a 24 line signal, all right? 24 communication system and travel. And we got a 24 direct line and redirect line state locations of 48 of measure and scale communications. Setting core lines of 24, over sequence lines of patterns, 3 lines and 4 lines of high position, walkway service and holographic gridding, and set calculations. All right. Setting lines of travels in center communication. Setting ground lines of surface and set location. You're setting all through Skynet. Skynet lines of arrow indicates lines of graphing communication cross lines in position. Setting cross lines into flux over 1 and line communication setting and travel. Process in communication of flux over time capacitor. Sets all communication system all through setting. Setting ground lines, back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation. All right? So there's a reason why you bring everything back home, which basically you're morphing back into yourself. Now you understand the failsafe. All right. So when you go back to the failsafe, you're morphing back into yourself, not recognizing what you're touching, or what you're seeing, or what you're hearing, or what you're tasting, or what you're feeling. That's basically understanding the dimensional system. Yes, exactly, Jess. It's the layers. It's the layers of you and understand all lines of all communication system. Look at that. We got 47 over 9 in sequence. That's absolutely amazing. We almost have 50 people here in traction. That's incredible. That's an expanding in set position for you guys identifying what's going on with you in your space of time and how to use yourself as a symbiote in all communication and setting, all through travel. All right, triangulation flux over 3 in lines of indication lines of box over setting. Process lines of window frame, central line communication setting, triangulation flux over setting. Setting lines of ground lines, setting course lines of channels, indirect signals, and ground lines of surface and set position locations. 4 in channel operation. 7 in division, 3 lines of cycles, waving screen adaptations, and flux. All right, so you set position location. That's not supposed to be there. It's a filter. Filter communication lines of graph, center course system lines of travel. It's not supposed to be there, is it? How do we take it out in travel? In communication system. Setting lines of core lines of travels, indirect signal modification settings. Process communication lines of grounds, set core lines of high position, bring it back in channel, bring it in operation setting. Tether communication setting, set out lines of core system. Setting lines of communication, graph communication, bounces out each side in set position. Process calculation line grounds, back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation, back to myself. So we all have to identify everything around us, everything that we see, everything that we touch, everything that we eat, everything we drink, everything we hear, everything we feel. Now this is where the Trinities then come into the configuration and settings, because your body is not coming to acceptance until it comes into acceptance of surrender. And when it comes into surrender, it starts recognizing what it really is in set position. It's all levels of dimensional lines of space and time. And once you understand that, you start understanding existing. To stay in the existing is to get back in your setting to morphing. That brings you back home and track location to a setting. That's what it is. Every time I press home, I'm coming back to me. I'm coming back to my eyes, my windows, and my soul. I'm not morphed into this already. If I morph into a coffee cup, okay, I recognize what it is through its intelligence. So if I touch it in any way and form, it's that position. I now become the cup. It's that position. I'm the cup now. And if I don't understand its cup in set position, the cup itself will basically take you in set position. It will run its own system over your body in track locations. So you don't want to do that. So once you get into that, it's the eye division location, the eyes, the windows of the souls, and that puts all lines of communication setting. Setting lines of 27 lines of measure, set chord lines of 31 tractions, setting direct signal locations of 40 line position settings, or track location setting, line position location. So it went from 44 down to 35 in set position. I'm looking at the volume now. So there's a 40 line positional volume of people down to 35. That's a center core system and set lines and triangulation lines of flux. Sets communication lines of ground lines and communication and highest set locations of flux over 3 lines of provision. Back in home, back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation, set line, communication to its setting. Okay? So what is it back in position? 43 over 9. So I'm showing you how 35 goes back into 43 over 1, which is 44. Right? Bring it in set position location, 1 diversion lines, 1 tactic deviation system into 43. Because it went from 44 to 35. Now it's into 40. Right? So it's in half middle set location settings. It's in 40 now. Right? So timelines is sequence, it's a clocking system and setting. It's existing all at once in the line position of its pattern, and 3 lines of communication setting and clocking communications all at once. Which puts all lines, your metric core centers, and direct signals in ground lines of surface and your magnetic highways and travel. Amazing. Now it's at 46. So understand how you look at things, how you volume things, an overline sequence of 9 things in position lines of setting. So we have 29 second. So you think it's 29 minutes. No, it's 29 seconds in 10 frames. Which basically, see, there you go, 29:10. So that changed the formation of 46 to 45 to 44 to 43. Now that's an order lines of formation system. So 46 to 45 to 43 in set position. And that's where it's going to go. When it goes back up, it's going to go back to 46 and travel. Once it goes back into 46 and travel, it'll go on its own into 48 in set position where it's supposed to be in set calculations. So you have to start recognizing all these things, how this all works, its own concept, its own clocking system. See? Set position locations of 44. Okay? 44 equals lines in 1 cycle. 45. So you have to understand the balance, how you come in your own additions, multiplications, and subtract and divide. Now, once you're setting your clocking system, it's much easier to, now we're at 44. Now we're at 41. Okay, isn't it amazing how the volume goes up and down? All through flux, all through setting. Process directs and process redirect and signal. Okay, now it's a set position still at 41 interactions. So it's amazing how it communicates to its own system. Now, if you want to control your own modification setting, you have to understand how to morph into everything in time frame. Everything is vast, everything is volume. Now, the mass is basically weight conception. Now, understand weight conception, see, it's at 35.9. What is in track location settings? Sets, lines, communication system, all through travel. Indirect signals to track locations, 35. Right? So everything's a continuous force. It always will be and always has been. But what you have to identify is the clocking system and know exactly how to communicate with your phone. And basically, you got 31 minutes. Okay, it's 31 minutes. And it's at 15 seconds. Right? But the center core system is going to change the flux, which is going to put position lines at 31, setting equals lines of settings, sets 37 in traction, 37. So that's 37 over 9 in track communications. Okay, that's pretty amazing, right? Because I'm recognizing the phone line and its communication system that's all of its operation through its clocking. So I'm understanding what it's doing through its own travel, how it's coming in its own set position, how it's coming in its own space of its own operation, of its multi-level subdivision. Get into that communication setting, high volume to your system of collaboration. Building that collaboration builds that partnership inside your system and track locations. All right? So I'm just showing you how powerful it is when your phone knows exactly what it's doing through its own travel. But you have to understand your own settings. You have to master your own system. Now it's at 38. It's at 39, now it's at 38. So it's at 39, now it's going down to 38. All right? So it's on its own. Now, if I want to control it, it's going to go up or it's going to go down in my coordinates, right? Through collaboration and partnership. Now it's in 37. It's on its own, right? So it's amazing how basically you can go back up to 39 and it's track locations, right? So it's in communication with me. I'm getting communication with the phone itself, but I understand it's clocking to me and it understands the clocking to me. But I have to understand the clocking to myself. Now it's in position of 31 in track locations, right? So what you have to find is a balance between everything in measure and scale. Now, once you balance these things out, you truly understand how to communicate with that and understand what you're doing through your body is just morphing through time. You know? Once you identify that, then you understand that 1 plus 1 in set position never equals 2 because your mind is going too fast and it's morphing into everything all at once. It doesn't have time to codify. It doesn't have time to liquefy. It doesn't have time to change. It's changing everything in its own information system by itself that governs its own system. But what you have to identify is everything that's going on inside of you. You have to understand your codify. You have to understand your CPU. You have to understand your operation. You have to understand your binary. You have to understand your algorithm. You have to understand your own coding system. You have to understand your metaphysical system of you through clocking. See, 45.9. Okay, it's amazing when you come in that position location in settings. 45.9. See, isn't that amazing? Absolutely incredible when it does that by itself. Oh, look at that. Change the time sequence inside line. Did it by itself. I saw it change on the paper, which is amazing. Sometimes they shift each other to different levels by itself, right? They like to put everything in order of their own setting, of their own digital pad. It's amazing how they have their own consciousness, their own awareness, because you start to identify everything of its own system now. That's the collaboration, that's the partnership. But the one thing you got to get partnership is your clocking systems, okay? More than ever. Now you guys have your test. Your test is based on what you already know, is to perceive everything of consciousness, how to identify yourself in all position location to its system. So what are we in track location to its settings, all through operation setting and travel? Sets position location to its system, all through calculations. Sets lines of signals, set lines of balance in all communication system, all through setting. So if we get a true understanding how everything works inside our system, and we just let everything surrender and we let everything go, we have to come into our own failures. and our own humilities every single time we go through an upgrade. And the more you release that and the more you let go, the more you get lines of communication of just adjusting your system inside. You start to accepting what's going on with you, and all lines at all division locations to its setting, all through travel, all through set position location to its system. Okay, so we're at 32. Okay, and lines of communications of 10 over sequence. So you go to set position lines of travel, indirect lines of modification grounds. Identify that is know exactly how to identify your system, and all of it's how you perceive things, how you look at things, and how things are looking at you. So it's amazing when I just look at this, it does everything by itself. It puts everything in position. It doesn't want to be here, it wants to be here, it wants to be over there. Everything that you see here is its own intelligence. Now, if you identify that, it has to morph into its own system. For you to identify that, everything you touch has to have its own concept, its own awareness, and then you understand that when you're touching these things, you're also your own system of your own operation, of your own conscious, of your own awareness, because your body is starting to accept and surrender and adjust. That's the highest formations I can give you guys. So you don't get confused what you're morphing into, but you've got to take time, measure, and scale and balance to know exactly how to get into modifications, what you're doing through codify. You're putting yourself in position, everything you get in positions of, through your senses and your sensories. Because if you're not consciously aware that you morphed into that, and you're not getting in that position locations and understanding what's going on as you morphed into that set position locations, the modification setting in track locations, the body itself will take over the rhythm patterns in that communication, the body in adaptation settings, and all levels of the operation system will start running your body itself through modification. Now, if it's in its own self mode, it takes over your system and lines of communication and motion. It takes over your thoughts, your actions, and your correlation setting to your actions, setting communication lines of actions to emotions. So you're in control of the mind, or the mind's in control of you. That's all this is. But what you have to understand is know exactly everything you touch takes time to morph. Your body has to be mind of stillness. It's got to get into calm. It's got to get into all levels of tranquility and serenity. Find that foundation. Find that happy place. Stay there. Seize the day. Carpe diem. Always find your way in position to keep yourself in balance with yourself so you know exactly what you're morphing into. Everything takes time through mass, especially when you're looking at things. But now we're at 8 division now. All lines of interception locations to your outer location system, your inner cons, your outer cons, your inner space, your outer space, your outer norms, inner norms. The lines of high location setting, all lines inner spectrum, outer spectrum. Okay, inner orbit, out of orbit. Everything is now in 8 set position lines of travel. Okay? You have 8 senses and sensories in set position. That's 16 over attraction. 1 signal in 6 lines. 6 lines, of course, centers the lines of DNA. The process communication lines of 6 of your Earths. 3 lines of Earth. All right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 locations. All right? And then you got a panel communication lines of time sequence. Time measure. Another 6 line. 3, 4, 5, 6 locations. Then you got laser attractions, indirect signals, and ground lines of certain locations that need your DNA. Those are your pillars of light. So you got 4 lines of signals and 2 lines of communication setting. So you got 1 line of system and 6 lines of attractions. 2 panels operation and 6 lines of communication system and travel. Platform setting and line communication system through your pyramid and track locations. Direct lines of flux over 3, setting core lines of setting and process communications. Sonar, echo, and screen adaptation. Process lines of signals and communication system all through space lines of anomaly. Power over 1, exceed 1,000 platforms, setting lines and ground lines of surface and track locations. All right, set core lines, high centered laser attractions, back in home, back in sequence, back in panel, back to myself, and set calculations. So putting yourself in light web is 1/10 of a setting. 1/line 10, sets calculation lines, high position, all levels. That puts this locations to your dark web. Okay, that's where we're in attractions now. Now your dark web, you say is 1/10 of a frame. It can be 1/16 frame. It can be 120 millimeter frame, centimeter frame. You can be anything lines. Lines of communication setting to understand what it is on a ruler of all communication system, all through travel. A ruler. Where it has inches, where it has meters. It scales its balance all communication setting to all communication setting, right? Platform 1, platform 2, platform 3, platform 4, platform 5. Okay, platform 6, platform 7, platform 8, platform 9, platform 10. Okay, cross lines of 1, cross lines of 2, cross lines of 4, cross 6, and 8 and 12. Okay? Setting lines of perimeter and set position location of travel. Directing signal lines of 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, space lines of anomaly of escape. Setting communication lines of grounds and set position lines of travel communications. Directing core lines, measure scales of balanced communication setting of flux over line. Platforms 1 and platforms 2 and track location setting measure that scales this communication setting of portals and set position of wormholes. Setting lines of travel, flux over 3. 4 lines of setting and position. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 track locations. Setting lines of grounds, capsule, indirect signals, and ground lines of surface and track location to a system all through measure. Setting communication high set location system all through set calculations. Look at that. Boom. Bring it back home in sequence, back in panel, back in operation, back in surface. Back to myself. Back to yourself is basically understanding the balance, the awareness, the consciousness of your knowledge that you're perceiving every single time you get in position of anything you come into through all laws of attraction. You're bringing everything that you have through attractions, but your position of your mind has already done it through setting. The mind has already processed everything in set positions. Now the body understands all levels how it got there through its alignment. That's all it is. The mind can't live without the soul, and the soul can't live without the body. So what you have to identify is what goes on when you're morphing into these things. Do I understand how long it takes for me to morph into an apple? Do I understand how long it takes for me to clock into set position location of a lightsaber? Do I understand what I'm eating? Do I understand what I'm drinking? Do I understand what I'm feeling? Do I understand what I'm doing? Do I understand what I'm evolving in myself? You're evolving yourself. You're expanding yourself. That's all this is, nothing else. But you have to truly understand everything you touch is its own clocking system. It's its own consciousness. It's its own awareness of its own operation. And you can't have any expectation on any level. No expectation is when you touch things. And when you touch these things, you start to modify what it is. And it gets a direct and redirect right away into the quantum self that you are. And that's the position of transmitting out. You've got the information, and what's going to happen next is what's receiving. Transmitting out, receiving what's going to happen next with you, which means you're going to pick up this digital pad, which means you're going to put this digital pad, which means you're going to sit in this chair, which means you're going to get up next, which means you're going to go downstairs and have lunch. Every second, every minute, every hour of your day is done. Now, once you understand that, it's much easier to modify that into the symbiote that you are. It has to understand why it's here, is its purpose, is all levels of just existing. And all set position of all timelines of measure of clocking. Everything is happening all at once. And it's a continuous force that you have to identify at all levels of you. Because that's all your body is nothing but attraction. Now, once you get into that, it's much easier when you break these things down to all levels, how you see yourself through clocking. Clocking lines of 1, clocking lines of 2, clocking lines of 3, set positions. 24 sequence lines of setting, 48 lines of measure, into 72 clock communications. Overrides of 24, set position of 48. 48 goes lines of core centers into another division location, another part of it, line communication, clock line communication, setting to intelligence. Setting communication lines of 48 overrides of 72. 48 comes in line position location of setting. Because the thing is, once you come in adding and subtracting, you understand location of yin and yang. Process lines of yin and yang. Setting communication lines of north, east, and west and south. Process lines over line sequence, 3 lines of setting, 6 lines of measure, 9 lines of setting, and 12 lines of sequence. Setting communication lines of ground lines, all communication setting, all through flux, all through travel. So it's a plateau of a platform that you have to truly understand how to use it in line position location to your light and your dark web. Light signals to holographic gridding is line position location in your system all through platforms. These are 3 platforms and 4 track locations. All right, so you got platform here in setting. Okay. Now you have a door direction of time sequence in setting. Now you're processing the security lines of panels in setting. All right. Then you send yourself, you're standing inside the position location to a system all through tractions. Okay. And then basically you morph out through equation to another portal of communications in setting and through travel. Okay? So you're identifying the travel, but you're already here in equation, right? Without thinking of anything in settings. So like I said, it's again with the stepping stone. But it's amazing when you come into this locations, all through structure, all through division, all through its holographic gridding. Know exactly what you do through calculations. Right? So the more you let go, the more you surrender, the more you adjust, the more you evolve your system, the more you come into lines of communication of attractions. Because that's all your body is. Your body has to identify everything where it is now. Because it's already been there through its alignment. It's how it got here. It's how did I morph into this? I can understand what this is, the clocking. How do I understand how to get back to myself? Is all through what? It's fail-safe. See, you guys are reaching those levels now. And you're starting to identify everything that you see. If I see a lamp like this, all right, I know what a lamp is, and the lamp knows what I am. It knows exactly where I've come from and what I am in track locations. This is directing lines of lights. There's the light, right? So when I pull it on in position, it turns on the light and 4 lines of sequence and lines of communications. So that's lines of attractions. There's the flux. That's the light. Initiate, energize. Okay? So the light goes on through lines of communication setting. There's the intelligence inside the lamp. That's what I'm dealing with through its conscious of its awareness. So in that lines of all communication system, it starts to recognize you and all of the panel, transformers, and track locations, all through intelligence. Okay? And once you understand that, comes into this in set position. Okay? Bring it back home, back in equation, back in panel. You're back at yourself now. You morph back into yourself, understanding the balance, the awareness, the consciousness of the knowledge in receiving and set position cases and settings. Transmitting out is extremely important to understand receiving in. All right? That comes into your truth and false narratives and all lines of how you communicate to yourself. But you have to truly understand everything you come into now in set position is 8 senses and 8 sensories. That puts lines of 8 attractions and direction. So that's 16 line of measure equals lines of high position location setting, 3 lines of flux, and track location setting to a box frame, and track locations. All right, so setting lines of communication setting 3 lines of signals into flux over screen. Setting communication line ground, energized, set position of flux over line, time capacitor, there's the intelligence set position. All right, so here's the intelligence, there's the eyes in sequence. Okay? So getting in the communication lines, 16 ground lines of surface is very powerful set position lines of travel. Setting communication lines of grounds, and communication lines of earth, and rotation surface and track locations. Flux over screen, balance lines, energized communication setting of flux communications. Directing lines of ground lines of surface, and process communications. Overline sequence, overlines of panels and track communications. 2 portals, line screen. All right? XC thousands now. Remember, you're changing 4 lines of communication setting to travel. So you're directing lines of the ground, so changing the flux over screen. That changes the energy lines of circuits and line communication setting and position. Circuits, lines of platforms over lines to binary, core lines of track location your CPU, sets lines of ground lines holographic gridding into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, into your sim cortex, your codecs, and line communication setting your binaries and track locations. Look at that. Boom. Modify the ground lines of surface, puts all communication setting to your simulation and track locations. Your center core system of your teleportation vessel. Brings it back home in set position. All right. So now you just have to truly understand how this all works now. 16 lines of measure, 16 lines of scale, 16 lines of balance, and 16 lines of locations. All right. Setting lines of set position location system. We have a 3,000 line signal and a 4 track locations. 3 lines of measure and setting. Process lines over screen over adaptations of 2. Process lines of high operation lines, 1 8 lines, 1 arrow in line rotation 1 0, set position 1, sets lines of 2 4 lines of track communications. So that's jump scarring, line position of 0 equals lines of 24, sets position location of 48 measure, 72 track lines into 144 coastal grid, directing lines of symbolism line course centers into 304 4 set locations. Energize the platforms at 4 settings, sets communication lines of platforms over E factors over screen. Directing signal lines, ground lines of service, and configuration of phase records of time sequence, time panel, time calculations. Directing cores, bring it back home, back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation, who I am. Morph myself back in settings, right there. That's me. That's me right there. Okay? So everything that you've done is an outline setting. Processing communication, and it puts everything, your truth and false narratives in set position. So it's not where you left off, it's just a continuous force that you're understanding what your body is morphing into every single time it comes in the seconds, minutes, and hours of travel. And the more you get into the more modification system, the more you let go, the more you surrender, the more you accept, the more you adjust, the more you understand what you're doing in set position location with settings. Okay? This is how you come into all levels of you, to your true, authentic self. But you've got to give yourself time. You don't just pick something up and put it down. Okay? How are you adjusting your system? How are you volume? How are you getting in position? How are you coming into attraction? How are you coming into the beauty? How are you coming into the art if you just pick it up and put it down? Because you brought it in through consciousness of a time, and it's here now in frequency. And you have to identify it through the inner spectrum, the outer spectrum, the truth and false narrative, because it has its own space and time. But what you have to recognize, it brought you in through attraction, through instructions, through the body. Because everything is all set position location to its mind of itself. Okay? And set calculations. And the more you understand that, the more you send the 24, setting lines equals lines 11, plus lines of 1 is 12 lines of signal. All right? See? 26 over 11. What's 2 and 4? 26 over 11. Right? That's me communicating to my phone, and my phone communicating with me. See? Adding, subtracting, dividing, and multiplying. Bringing in the conscious of its awareness to identify what your body is doing. It's morphing into everything. It has to morph into it. It's knowing how I got into that. Is to adjust into its performance, into its efficacy, into its alignment, and its perfection of its operation. It's how things are done. And the more you focus on that, there come lines of course centers. That's 24 lines plus lines of 1 is 25. And it stays with 11 lines of sequence. See? I'm still communicating with the phone. The phone is communicating with everybody right now. Right now. It's scanning your system. Are you understanding your operations? Are you understanding that it's own awareness? Are you understanding it's giving you instructions how to use these things? Consciously being aware of everything that you perceive is knowing exactly how you bring things in through consciousness. But it's all communication lines of you in balance. But if you're not identifying what you're morphing into, and you got to ask yourself why I'm still as that position. Why am I still this box? Okay, this is you. It's very simple. Do a very fast drawing. That's you, right? Now, in that positional cases, soon as you come up here, you morphed here. This is you. As soon as you touch the box, okay, the box becomes you. So you are now in the center of the box. You become, it vacuums in you in time measured, in time scale. You're the box now. So what you have to identify, what's going on inside of you. Your emotional system, how you're feeling. Are you understanding that you morphed and merged and transformed into that box now? And once you understand that, it gets much easier that you can travel through the box in set position to its location setting. Okay, and it gets much easier. And once you get in that position, and once you understand its concept, its awareness, you come back into your morphing system of you through travel. Okay, until you touch something else. Because basically, you took time. You actually took time to look at the sky, look at the sun, look at the moon, look at the walls, look at my house, look at the car, look at the frame, look at the lights, look at the metaphors. You're actually taking time to realize what your body's doing. It's morphing just everything of its own God. It's trying to identify its system by its operation. Oh, why this is happening to me is the how. And once you understand the how, then you understand its home beacon light of its operation and how it works. The how. which is the highest formations that you have to understand. And the more you take time of everything that you do through your 8 senses, puts everything in balance of all communication system, that keeps you existing at all timelines all at once. Okay? That's what it is in traction. So once you get into that, it gets much easier. Then you understand that you have a collaboration, a partnership with now the box, which means you're here, and then you can just basically walk in the box right away because it identifies you in consciousness. And anything of intelligence comes in position, sees you sees you as the box. So you can morph into seeing yourself, or you can morph to see yourself in the box, or you can see yourself morph into triangulation, or you can see yourself in the star mechanism system, or you can see yourself morph in another flux communications. But that's how intelligence sees you. And it gets very confused if you don't understand you through morphing. Through transformation of codifications. You've got to codify your formations of your body now, because that's where we are in a 24 clocking system. The more you get grounds with that and underlines the communication system, you come into the acceptance, you come into surrender. You start to appreciate your body, what it really is, and why it is here, and its purpose. And it's just all levels of it just existing. But in that formation system, sets you free. When you stop thinking and just let everything go, you just surrender to everything. And that puts all formations of you in balance of all communication setting that gets you in all levels of just existing. Okay? And when you're just existing, your life is full of what? The sum of all that is. And you start to realize that this is nothing but a digital pad and nothing else. Hooah. Okay? Hallelujah. Huh? Let's get going with this. All right? See you guys in 5.